Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
I was like a beat too late on that. Did you notice? Weird.
I noticed.
It's because I was considering, do I ask this person if this seat is taken, or are they going to be creeped out? And then I just went for it, which is what I do in real life.
And what we've done every episode. So I'm glad you came back to it.
Oh my gosh, do you know what I did today that was so brave?
No.
Today I was going into the T, which is the subway system in Boston, and a guy was trying to piggyback off my T swipe. And I stood there blocking his way and said, "You don't get to piggyback. You need to swipe yourself."
Wow.
I'm like a modern day George Washington.
And how do conservatives not like this show with statements like that?
Don't get ahead. Don't get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to ruin the surprise that we've gotten a bad review.
Well, that's very brave of you, and I'm sure the transport. You guys even have it's like because I pictured it's like the Mr. Rogers trolley. It just goes back.
That's close. It's close. You know, it closes at 11 p.m. and
well, there's nothing to do after 11 in Boston anyway. That's
really after 9.
We've got a big meaty episode about bones. That was a weird.
All right,
we're talking graveyards.
I don't know, Ryan. That's not very comfortable for anybody to hear.
We're going to be talking about graveyards, though, which is something we always mention a graveyard. Usually, not always, but usually mention a graveyard when we do our sort of city guides, because you and I, like to go to graveyards. So we're going to talk a little bit about why graveyards are important, and then we're going to go back and forth on some of our favorite graveyards.
And you should mention this is in honor of Halloween.
Yes, this is Spooktober episode.
And graveyard or cemetery? Which one you go for? Graveyard? I like graveyard. Sounds more Halloween-y.
Yeah, cemetery. Yeah, I don't know what's the difference.
I don't think that there is a difference, but I don't know. Graveyard sounds more old-timey.
Yeah, it does.
How about boneyard? That's all your creepy bone talk there got me thinking about it.
Boneyard, that's apparently what they have in Europe, which I learned researching this episode.
Yeah, so you've got some interesting history and facts about boneyards, graveyards, and visiting, and you're going to give us some history, and you're going to give us, I think, some information that will change the way that touring graveyards and cemeteries goes. Like, I'm learning a bit here that's going to make me look at these tours or walk arounds pretty differently. And then we've each chosen 3 that we want to talk about and recommend.
Yeah, exactly. We've got some housekeeping up front here.
A lot of housekeeping. We've got and some good news, some bad news.
Yeah, let's start with the really good news. I'll let you do it. You're the good news guy.
That's right. So the really good news is this is a follow-up to our quest for Rick Steves, friend of the show, frequent guest, Rick Steves, who, as we've reported on previous episodes, has announced that he's going through treatment for prostate cancer. And he has put out a tweet or an X that says that he has gone through his successful surgery, and he was spending one night in the hospital, spending one night I'm so used to him in hotels. And he also was very playful about how being in a hospital was like going on a little journey and adventure. But it seems like he's doing quite well, and is psychologically handling it beautifully. He really had some very nice words to say about the medical staff and surgeon. And so, as ever, we're relieved to hear that about Rick, one of the great lights in travel media. And we will continue to think of him, pray for him, and hopefully get him back on the show sometime.
Absolutely. We're glad to hear that you're recovering, Rick. Wish you a speedy recovery. And now to talk real quick about somebody who's not a friend of the show.
Not a friend of the show. Yeah, this one I'm sad about. So, as everyone knows, when we had to end the quest for Rick Steves, the successful quest for Rick Steves, we then moved on for what we called the quest for Secretary Mayor Pete. And this was I was really, I really thought we were going to do it to get Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg on the show. You know what? I have a feeling post-election we could probably get him
sure.
on.
Probably get a lot of the Kamala folks on.
Okay, all right, okay. You're sending me some pretty depressed texts deep in the night, Ryan. So I know you're reading all the polls. But sadly, we got a very we got quite a bit of engagement from his media staff and digital staff. But ultimately, I think that they probably want him out in front of crowds. And so we did get a polite decline on getting him on the show at least before the election. So we're going to keep at it. I think this quest is not over, but rather paused because I want to be realistic that, time is limited and the clock is ticking for him.
Yes, it is. Although he's a young man, so he has a long career in front of him. I want to do some review shout outs. Got a great 5-star review from Melissa Kalawaski. She says, great travel podcast. Love listening to it. We are excellent, informative hosts. We have a great sense of humor. This might be my mother. And she's planning a trip to New England next summer and hopes there's going to be another installment of Boston. I think we should link because I think we've done, I want to say 47 episodes on Boston.
Well, I've got some good news for this listener, which is there's going to be some Boston content in this very episode.
Oh, but
we've got some very good cemeteries here.
We do have the Boston trilogy, and then because Kiernan's a fan of Star Wars, we have a second trilogy, or we have other episodes, spin-off episodes.
We got Boston prequels, sequels. We got Boston stories, standalone. So I think a series is coming out soon, probably a Patreon exclusive.
Yeah. So if you're newish to the pod, just go back through the archives. You'll find the Boston trilogy, and lots of Boston there. And then another 5-star review from Emily KY123. Loves listening to the pod and is planning a trip to Peru, and I've listened to most of the episodes and loves the content and the conversational style. Highly recommended. So 2 5-star reviews, and then
the counterbalance.
Yeah, and this I think sadly, was this must have been because we spent a few minutes at the top of last show, endorsing a candidate for president. This is their platform. We give this away for free. In fact, this cost us money to produce. So we're paying for folks to listen to this for free. So, that's not nothing. But we had a review here, a 1-star review, which I think is a little harsh.
I think, and her name is Kimmy Cakes 1.
Yeah.
And Kimmy Cakes 1 sounds like she'd get along very well with Cornhusker 55, who likes to make an appearance in the reviews.
Cornhusker is definitely single, so reach out.
I think a little Cornhusker with a side of Kimmy Cakes sounds delicious. I could definitely go for that.
But she says that she's a new listener. She loves to travel, really liked the length of the podcast. And the more they listened, the more politics came up. And she was really bummed. And then she says something I sort of disagree with. And that is that travel isn't political. It's something we can all do and meet together. And, I was just in Medellin for the weekend, and, I went to the big Botero gallery there. Let me tell you, a lot of politics in Mr. Botero's work. I went to the Escobar house, Pablo Escobar's house. A lot of politics on both in the U.S. politics and Colombian politics in that tour. So I do think it's really hard to engage in a place and not learn something about their politics or be presented with politics in any of these venues. And certainly, you don't agree with all the politics that you see when you travel, and that's getting other people's point of view and getting outside of your worldview is kind of one of the reasons why I think we like to travel.
Well, she also said that we turned off 50% of our listeners, which I don't think is representative of our listeners in general. But I will also say, I think we've made a concerted effort to try to keep politics off the podcast generally, even though we are both news obsessives and quite political. And we did give a trigger warning, and we said to go ahead if you didn't want to hear our thoughts on the presidential race on that episode. And, we're trying to be a big tent. Clearly, we call ourselves Romney Democrats. And I think that Kimmy Cakes won. I don't think she's correct that politics has been increasingly making its way into the show. I think if you go back, it was a big part of the show. I think we've tamped it down. I think in this one episode, we brought it back. Maybe she found the quest for Pete to be a part of that. I don't know.
But Pete's in charge of many aspects of our travel lives.
Exactly right. And a lot of things that have changed as far as the regulations, especially of the airline industry, which is why I think that that's like real news. I don't even think that's political, really. And so, it does seem kind of harsh. I think we're going to return to, trying to keep it big tent, and we welcome all listeners and we welcome all feedback. But the one star felt like maybe you could have put this in an email instead of, when you say you like all the travel content, let's keep the show rating well.
Then it's at least a 3-star,
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's the housekeeping. And with that, I think we should light our candles, put on our spooky, I don't know, what do you wear to a cemetery? I mean, normal clothes, I guess.
No, black suits.
Black suits. Yeah. And I think it's time to take off.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Kiernan, we are here. No, we're not. We're not in a graveyard. That would be really fun to record in a graveyard, though.
Yeah. Bad Wi-Fi, though.
Yeah, bad Wi-Fi. Probably not these days. I mean, that's one of the things they ask about when am I going to have access down there? I
feel like you'd be okay with that as long as you had your phone and a charger and
bury
access.
Me with my phone fully charged. That's all I ask. So graveyards, are not just a place where, people are laid to rest and you go visit your family members, and they obviously are that. And there was a graveyard in my hometown that I unfortunately had to go to a few times when I was a kid, and not a great tourist destination. But graveyards, especially in the 19th century, sort of began to be culturally important because there weren't that many parks yet. They were really early public spaces. So when people needed a place to go that wasn't their home or their work, people would go to graveyards and they would have picnics and they would walk around and sort of enjoy the outdoors and the sun and the air. And they were using the graveyards like this. So people started to make graveyards that were just more and more beautiful.
Now, you're talking primarily about European practices, right?
Yes. This is in the 1800s. But then, we go to New York City, and we've done a whole episode that sort of talks about this aspect of it. But in the U.S., we have a park in Brooklyn called Greenwood Cemetery. Going to talk about it more later, but it's a beautiful cemetery that opens in 1838, and it was so beautiful and such a success that Friedrich Law Olmsted, who is one of the main architects and landscapers of Central Park and Prospect Park, the two biggest parks in New York, was inspired by it when he was designing those public spaces. And if you go to Greenwood Cemetery today, it's an active cemetery, but it has a very much a relaxed park atmosphere, and it's beautiful.
I like the phrase "active cemetery."
They're still.
Can it be?
They're still using it. They're still burying people there. Yeah, sure. To get a spot in Greenwood, you've got probably a pretty penny.
Somebody, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably not super available. And then a garden. And then these cemeteries have had a blend of art and nature and public spaces. And that's what you see in a lot of graveyards. In fact, I remember from my interview with you, Kiernan, and from reading your book, that there's public art in some of these cemeteries in Boston.
That's right, and one of those is going to be on my list. And it's as you say, it was actually founded as a space where you were both burying people and a public space for art right from its inception. It wasn't just something, because that feels like kind of a modern thing you might put on top of an antique cemetery here, just to get tourists, give them a reason to come in. But no, it actually goes back farther.
And then as a tourist, you go to a graveyard and you're looking for, famous folks from that city or from that country who have been buried there. I went when I was in Nashville during the pandemic. I went to the Nashville, going to a cemetery, very pro pandemic activity. You're outside, so we went and we found Patsy Cline's grave and Tammy Wynette's grave, and a lot of graveyards will have little maps where they have you'll be able to sort of find the famous folks who are buried there. So when you and I were in Richmond together, we got a map and we spent a good amount of time trying to find President Monroe's gravestone.
That's right. Remember, had that like beautiful sculptured house with like screens around it.
Yeah, it was so fantastic.
Cool.
Now, one thing I learned just last weekend, my friend Taus was visiting from Copenhagen. He was here in Colombia with me. And, we were talking about graveyards. And he said that in many parts of Europe, because Europe is so old and there's only so much space, that a family only leases the land that you're buried in. And after 30 years, you're dug up and your bones are put in a communal grave, like a big pit of bones.
Like a pauper's grave?
Yeah, like a pauper's grave. Unless you leave unless you set up a trust that pays for your, pays for you to be there indefinitely. And he said that when he was younger, his great grandparents' graves were dug up, and his mom went and picked up both of the tombstones and put them in his yard outside of Copenhagen.
I mean, this was right when you found this out, when you were researching for the episode. We know you're master of preparation where these episodes are concerned. You found this out like 2 weeks ago, and you were like, Kiernan, have you ever heard of this? And I've never heard. This is completely new news. Is this like a well-known trend? People should write us in outofofficepod@gmail.com. Did you know about this? I didn't know about this. And 30 years doesn't seem like that long. I mean,
to an American, it is just like, what? Because like in my hometown, the graveyard's got plenty of space, So yeah, that was something.
I mean, I feel like in the U.S. the expectation is it's forever.
Yeah. I guess maybe we're going to be.
I have to say, I do think that this European way makes a lot more sense. I probably would stretch it to like 80 years, so that most of the people that knew you are gone, and those who are still alive don't remember you. 30 years just seems pretty fresh.
Yeah, so now they do keep like celebrities and royalty and stuff like that.
God,
I know. It's so bad. It's like elitism beyond the grave.
Kimmy Cakes, we don't like this. Cornhusker, we don't like this.
Anyway, so that's just some interesting things about graveyards to think about. When you are in a city, if you have to decide, something to do, graveyards when it's a nice day and you're in a place with a lot of a deep history, it can be a really fascinating place to go. So why don't we jump into some of our favorite graveyards that we've been to, and we can just alternate. How's that sound?
That sounds perfect.
All right. So I already spoke a little bit about Greenwood Cemetery. This is in Brooklyn. This actually became a place that I went, I had been a time or two before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it was like outside of Prospect Park. It was like the one place to really go to like walk around. And there's quite a few like notable New York City residents who are buried there. Leonard Bernstein, the acclaimed conductor and composer, is buried there. Jean-Michel Basquiat, who is a super hipster artist, is buried there as well. And it's a really beautiful cemetery, and it's got a lot of rolling hills. It is actually a good place to walk and get your steps because it's not flat. I mean, you are like walking up and walking down, and it's a very kind of like constructive space. Have you been down there?
I have now. Here's my question, because I'll tell you what brought me down there. Do you know about the parrots?
No, tell me about the parrots.
There are a flock of green they're parakeets, and they have nested in like the entrance gateway there.
Yes.
And it is so weird to see them in New York City. And yeah, you can go as a tourist and observe these green parakeets that look like they belong in a rainforest. But they've chosen Greenwood as their home.
Yeah, and that I forget who designed that the entrance, but it's somebody who did a lot of other sort of beautiful stonework in New York during that time. And one other grave I'll give a shout out to, because I really love it. An artist named William Holbrook Beard has a grave with a massive black bear sculpture on top of it. It's a very cool grave. So that's my first one. Kiernan?
Well, Ryan, if you're into that bear sculpture, let me recommend a particular grave way uptown in Manhattan. It's in the Trinity Church Cemetery, and it is the grave of John James Audubon, which has carvings of all different types of birds all over. It's like one of the cooler graves. It's actually, I found it in the Secret New York guide. That's what brought me up there. And it is definitely one of the cooler graves. It's on 155th Street and Broadway.
And that's different than the Trinity Church Cemetery, which is downtown and
yes,
has the Hamilton has Eliza's buried there. Yeah,
exactly right.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, I mean, New York has a lot of history, so a lot of people, similar to, I believe, Boston, Kiernan.
Yes. Well, just like you started in New York, I started close to home with Boston. There's great cemeteries here, obviously, because this was one of the first places people were living and getting educated in the United States. From Europe, there was this tradition of burial. And so I just wanted to call out a couple cemeteries that some of which are more on the tourist tracks, some of which are off. The first that is on the Freedom Trail is the Granary Burial Grounds. Any Freedom Trail walk or history walk around Boston Common will take you there. It's super. I mean, it's like star-studded. We're talking Sam Adams. We're talking Paul Revere. There's a giant grave that says Franklin on it, not Ben Franklin, but yes, Ben Franklin's parents.
Is that where the huge Hancock?
That's exactly right.
Classic.
Yes, and then there's a giant grave for John Hancock, which fits exactly in with the caricature we all have with him. And there's always people in costumes, and three-corner hats, kind of leading tours around there. Another one that's not too far away, it's probably like a 20-minute walk away, is called the Copp's Hill Burying Ground. And this is featured in Secret Boston. There's quite a few historic graves there. It's like a high ground. And so it gives quite a nice view of the neighborhood around it. And there's a grave there that has musket bullet cracks, like bullet holes that were hit on the grave because British soldiers used it for target practice. And there's also the grave of a founder of a branch of the Masonic tradition. It was the person who founded Masonic lodges for Black members, the first people to find it for Black members. And the Masonic Knights, I think they call themselves, created a great grave memorial there for him, which is in Copp's Hill. Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is in Cambridge, is one of these beautiful, walkable, more park-like cemeteries, like what you described, Ryan. And there's some beautiful, really odd artworks. There's a giant sphinx that was put there at a time where Americans were very obsessed with Egyptian iconography. Also, the grave of Buckminster Fuller can be seen there. And my favorite is a very odd grave, which is an Armenian family that for 400 years has been manufacturing cymbals, like the kind of symbol. And there's a grave with the symbol put right into the grave. The name of the family is Zildjian. And if you want to know where it is, you got to get Secret Boston. The final one I want to recommend, which is a little Actually, sorry, there's two more. Two more, very similar in the park-like, but also featuring artistic works like what you were talking about. This one's a little further away, but I will tell you it is well worth the trip. Forest Hills Cemetery, which has like a sculpture walk within it and just has beautiful lakes and ponds and walking trails there. And then the final one, right near Harvard Yard, is Cambridge's Old Burying Ground. And the Old Burying Ground has two things that I find super interesting. One, it actually has the oldest headstone for an African American, an enslaved teenager who was buried there. She died during an epidemic in 1714, and her name is Cicely, Cicely. So if you're there, if you go into the main gate, you walk straight forward, and it is a very diminutive grave, unassuming, but well worth paying your respects. Finally, they have these graves that look like giant rectangles, like body-sized rectangles, and they call these table tombs. And apparently, most of these, if you were to remove the top of that giant rectangle, you would see stairs going down into the earth, and there's a vault buried down there with shelves on which different bodies were put. And it's like this secret little passageway into a cave. It's very, very creepy.
I like that. That is creepy. Speaking of creepy, I talked about this a bit on the episode about Buenos Aires. La Recoleta Cemetery. This is the most famous cemetery in Argentina. It's located right down in the center of sort of the tourist track, so it's hard to miss. You do have to pay admission if you are not visiting a family member, so do bring a big wad of Argentinian currency. And a lot of notable folks buried there. The most famous grave, without question, is Eva Perón's grave, and you can find that because it'll be the one with the huge line of people taking a picture in front of it. I'll make sure I post my photo in front of Evita's grave on the old Instagram OOO podcast. But, because of the history of Buenos Aires and because of the fact that it's right near the ocean, all the graves are mausoleums and built up. So it's visually very striking, really well kept up. And there was a funny thing. I don't remember if I mentioned it, but there must have been a fad amongst men in the mid 1800s when they died to be buried and have a statue of themselves with a perfect male physique.
Sure.
Absolutely.
That's my plan.
And there's just all these statues of just incredibly, chiseled, obviously, but these incredibly buff men next to a guy who was like a baker. And I'm like, I don't know if he really had this physique in real life, but not a bad way to go. It gives it a little.
He probably wasn't a good baker.
A little homoerotic vibes to the cemetery there, but. Definitely one to check out if you're in Buenos Aires. What's next on your list, Kiernan?
Ryan, my second one, as you know, I love presidential history. And actually, if this is kind of tickling your fancy, I would recommend a book called Dead Presidents, which is a travelogue written by a guy named Brady Carlson to a bunch of the president's burial places. I've seen a bunch, and anytime I'm near one, I try to make time. I was once on a ski trip in up north, and I went to Calvin Coolidge's grave, fittingly quite a quiet graveyard. But the one I want to talk about is my favorite and yours, Ryan, Theodore Roosevelt's grave. Now, you and I visited Sagamore Hill together, and that's the historic home that's preserved from Theodore Roosevelt. And just about, I think it's about a mile and a half away, is this very quiet, beautiful cemetery that overlooks Oyster Bay, New York. And it's called Young's Cemetery. And that is where Theodore Roosevelt is laid to rest. It's a very small kind of private plot. There's, a fair amount of headstones, but very serene. And what I like about this one is I feel like it is exactly where TR would have wanted to be buried, in this area that he loved, overlooking nature. And what was especially interesting is this cemetery was actually donated to the National Audubon Society and became the first Audubon songbird sanctuary in the United States, which for a naturalist like TR, fantastic.
A lot of Autobahns on this episode.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, it's all the same Audubon technically, but yeah. And Ryan, your third pick here.
My third pick is a super famous cemetery. It's one that I went to a couple times as a kid, probably on school trips, but it is Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia, right over there by Washington, D.C. And, this is, it's a really patriotic cemetery. This is where a lot of America's soldiers are buried. There's a lot of American flags. It's a very solemn atmosphere there. And I think probably some of the, a lot of notable folks, in fact, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is there, which honors, soldiers who passed away in war, whose bodies couldn't be identified. But also William Howard Taft is there. But that's not the president that people go for. People go to see John F. Kennedy's grave, which has the eternal flame, which is a flame that has been burning since John F. Kennedy was laid to rest there. And it's quite a sight to see. Have you been to Arlington?
Do you know, I don't believe that I have, which seems a crime. So that's definitely got to be on my list. And how many presidents do you say? JFK, Taft?
JFK and Taft. Yeah, there might be some others, but those are the.
It seems like there might be another couple of others. But yeah, this is certainly a solemn place. And I know, we made light that it's like a Halloween episode, but obviously this, and actually my next one too, do have the more serious side of things here.
Well, why don't you take us serious, Kiernan?
Well, so this one I went quite abroad with it, and this would be a place that you would not be visiting right now, but it's a cemetery in Lviv, Ukraine, which is on the western side of Ukraine, a city on the western side of Ukraine, which Catherine and I visited years ago. And I'm going to try to pronounce the name of it. It's Lychakivsky. So I think it's Lychakivsky, I believe. And it is a vast, very old cemetery that was built a bit away from the downtown area of Lviv, because this is like where where they needed a place to put a great amount of bodies. And it is extremely evocative. Very old graves. The oldest ones date to the late 18th century. A lot of religious iconography. I remember it being like very tightly packed and looking through the rows and just seeing grave upon grave upon grave. Very like detailed old graves. And it was definitely more a place for reflection. And as I was preparing for this episode, I actually read about a cemetery in Lviv that is a military cemetery that bears a similar name. And I don't know whether this is part of the same one that I visited, but it's basically because of the war, they have been bringing new bodies into what had been a kind of closed off cemetery. And just like a really depressing and sad story about the brunt that the Ukrainians are bearing from this war. Again, I mostly return to it for it did make me think about seeing this story about, how while these cemeteries kind of over time transform into tourist attractions, it kind of like the grave I was talking about in the old burying ground in Cambridge, you do want to take time to remember the actual people that are buried in the graves and their human story that got them there.
Yeah, and obviously always behave respectfully. Don't walk over the graves, and remember
Kimmy Cakes is about to get very upset if you keep talking about that, Ryan.
And just remember that there were people who were there, to pay respects to their friends and family. So always keep that in mind.
Can I ask on that front, Ryan? Do I recall correctly that you've gone to a Day of the Dead in Mexico?
I have been to a Day of the Dead celebration in Mexico.
And so did you see their cemeteries, festooned and bright and, places of social gatherings?
That mostly happens in Oaxaca. I've never been to a cemetery in Mexico City. I mean, it's a huge city, so there must be one. I should actually make a point.
This is a very good year. I feel like you've done so much in Mexico City. This is a great next adventure for you.
Yeah, so I'll figure out what the one to go to is, and I will report back. I do want to end on a creepy Holly. I do want to end on a creepy Halloween note. Back on October 31st, 2020, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, a city we both know and love. And I went on a late night Halloween ghost tour of the Magnolia Cemetery, which is a really old cemetery there. It was put on by Bulldog Tours. So, this episode's coming out before Halloween. I would encourage folks to look up your local, ghost tours and see if folks are doing anything, fun and entertaining. They took us through the cemetery late at night. It started at 9 and we were there till like 11. So it's weird to be in a cemetery that late. And they told a lot of stories about, some of the more darker folks who were buried there, some of the bad things that have happened in Charleston, and some ghost sightings. And it was I didn't see any ghost, but it was a really fun way to spend a Halloween evening there in Charleston at the beautiful Magnolia Cemetery. So yeah, I hope that ends in a little bit of a spooky note.
Very good.
Well, Kiernan, just like everybody in these cemeteries, I think it's time for our last stop.
What do I say?
The last stop.
Oh, right. The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan, we're here in the last stop. It's the last segment of the show, the final segment of the show. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People segment. And that's because it's where we come together as a community, much like the dead come together as a community underneath the ground. And actually, that makes me want to plug another book, not just Dead Presidents, but Lincoln in the Bardo, a great cemetery book. Surely you've read that, right, Ryan?
Shockingly, I haven't.
God, you've got to read that. It'd be amazing. Okay, maybe that'll be my next last stop. But this is where we come together to share. It could be a book recommendation, like that freebie last stop I just gave. Could be a souvenir. Could be a tale. Could be an article. Could be plans we're making, or a trip that we just took. But it must check one box. It must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So Ryan, I'm going to ask you, as I ask you every episode, do you have a last stop this week?
I do, Kiernan. I just finished a horror novel, and I don't read a lot of horror fiction, but this was highly recommended and has won a lot of awards. The book is called Air Share of the Night by Mariana Enriquez, and she is an Argentinian novelist who was shortlisted for the Booker, which is a big deal for a book of short stories that she wrote. But I read about this because it takes place primarily in Argentina and Paraguay during the time of the generals. So real high level, it's basically a book about this elite cult that is operating and snatching people and doing all sorts of horrible things. But people don't really notice because the government is doing the same thing. So people just go missing all the time. So they're sort of hiding in this dark part of Argentinian history. And it's a really, really good book. Highly recommend it. And one of the things that stuck out to me as somebody who's been to Argentina and Paraguay is quite a bit of it takes place on the border of those two countries and Brazil at these famous waterfalls, Iguazu, the Iguazu waterfalls, and these are supposed to be incredibly beautiful, massive waterfalls. I've never been, but the description of them in the book and the photos I've seen, it's a bit out of the way from Ascension. But when people, come to Paraguay, a lot of times they're heading down to these falls. So it made me really, really want to visit, visit these and see. There's a national park in Argentina dedicated to them, and a national park in Brazil dedicated to them. And both of those are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So, great novel, tie-in to travel, and reinforces my desire to go see these waterfalls.
Sounds absolutely breathtaking.
Did you bring a last stop for us this week?
I did, of course. Ryan, I follow an Instagram account called National Park News, and National Park News always feeds my wanderlust. And this week, especially because I have not been to Yellowstone. That is like a major bucket list national park for me. And they reported that Steamboat Geyser, which is a geyser that explodes erratically, but when it does, it's some of the tallest flumes in the world. There's actually only been one other geyser that hasn't erupted in 100 years that is believed to have erupted further, but it blows steam and mud and rock 300 feet into the air, and it just went this past week. So super cool video to see. And I was Googling around for some reactions to it and found from some outlet called Cowboy State Daily, the headline, Steamboat Geyser erupts, covers cars with millions-year-old gunk. Apparently, there's a parking lot very close to the geyser. And when it blows, it like cakes your cars with minerals and mud. And so they've talked to somebody who owned a car that they had to get, professionally detailed afterwards because this geyser decided to blow for the first time in months. And it totally ruined their finish.
Oh, well, I would park a little further away from the geyser just in case.
I also think it's worth saying, by the way, it's been, I've seen frequently this year people in Yellowstone who have been walking off the boardwalks that protect you from the thermal waters. And just this past summer, there was a tourist who got jailed for 7 days and got a $1,500 fine because he was walking right by this geyser. And imagine if that had happened right when it erupted, that guy would have been fried. Wouldn't need a cemetery for that body.
Yeah. I mean, if it does that to your car, think of what it can do to your body. Well, that's pleasant, and that's sort of Halloween-y,
Yeah, it's a good Halloween.
Yeah. Well, I think that about sums up graveyards. Everybody have a great Halloween and the rest of your Spooktober, and we'll be seeing you soon. I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
You dressing up? This suit taken? Ryan, are you dressing up this year?
I'm always dressed up as a nomad.